All right. It's been a minute. It's been like 1,900 two. I don't know, a lot of minutes, but I'm gonna start recording episode 23. There was a little bit of a gap because I was sick and it was sucky, so I couldn't record the podcast last week. But I'm back with a vengeance with an episode that I'm going to encourage people not to listen to because it's not going to be good. So hang tight. Welcome back to Finding Your Identity. This episode is episode 23. And it's actually, let's see, what's it going to be about? I don't know. Maybe whatever comes to mind. It's going to be a little bit of the rantings of Mr. Derek because there's things I like to rant about occasionally. And it's not even really a rant, but you might not even want to pay attention. But you should pay attention because it's interesting. But maybe it's not going to be interesting. Who knows? It's going to be full of randomness. And you're probably wondering what the heck I'm talking about. So I'm actually going to do this episode about generations. So what does that mean? Not like Star Trek, generation, next generation, or whatever, but the generations of people, like how we fit into different generations in our life, and it's based purely off of when we were born, what year you were born, and the years that you're born, and the time period that you're living through. And it usually spans, I think, at least 10 to 15 years, maybe up to 20 years. I will get into that in a minute. I'm going to provide some details about it, but it's not so much about the details of the generations. I mean, I'm going to provide what the generations are called and the years in which they span, but I also, have some thoughts that I want to share about how people kind of fit into them and how I actually don't really like the classification of generations. And I'll tell you why I don't like that. So hang tight. That's what this episode is going to be about. I'm encouraging people to listen and not listen and listen, but keep listening, but don't really listen, but listen, because it's that kind of an episode where, some people might like it because I'm going into an area where I'm going to be pretty opinionated about this. So hang tight. Okay, so generations. What am I talking about? I don't know. I was hoping you'd tell me. I mean, that's why I'm here. I'm here for you to tell me. Oh, wait, no, that's not how it works because this is not a two-way microphone type of thing. It's not a phone. It's got the word phone in it. Anyways, here's the definition from Wikipedia. A generation is all the people born and living at about the same time, regarded collectively. It can also be described as the average period, generally considered to be about 30 years. I'll see, I was a little off on the numbers. During which children are born and grow up, become adults, and begin to have children of their own. So, you think of generations. I think of generations as in terms of, I remember one time when I was visiting my father and my grandfather was there and we were all doing some work outside. I think we were building a chicken coop or something, but it was kind of cool to think that there were three generations of McKinney guys there. And, it's funny because that's essentially how the generation is defined in a sense. And you think of it as, generations in terms of, how you're classified in some people think of this, but this is how marketing people think of you. And I'm pointing directly at you because marketers classify this. Now, remember, my background degree is in marketing, so you're kind of forced to study this stuff. But generations, they're essentially, ways to target. If you look at a generation and you look at them from a demographic perspective, you can target people based off of the generations because generally speaking, they like the same things. They have similar, tastes. So, what you find is when you're trying to market something to a group, you're classifying them by age range, and essentially by doing that, you're fitting them into some kind of generational time space. And for instance, the most common people probably have heard of, even if you're younger, well, I'm going to say there's two. It's millennials, which is the hot topic, in politics these days because they're thrown all over the place. And, the term millennial and there's a certain connotation behind the term millennial. So you got millennials, and that one's popular. Then you hear baby boomers, because baby boomers were this massive generation, 70 something million people that fit in that generation. And it was the largest generation for a long time until the millennials. And, because of that, it's in essence, such a large generation that most people have kind of heard of it, and forget about the Generation Y, which came after that. And, that is always kind of looked at as a method for not Generation Y, Generation X. Boy, I'll get into that in a second. Generation Y is more, it's a generic term to describe the next coming generation. Anyways, so the baby boomers kind of being such a big generation, when and really, that started. So kind of, I guess I'm getting right into the weeds here with what it was, but the baby boomers, they were, the generation that essentially was born after World War II. So the soldiers came home and they married and they bought their houses and they had a bunch of babies, and that was kind of how you celebrate ending a world war. So you end up with a bunch of kids and you get a huge generation of kids. Now, that time frame is 1946 to 1964. My father was in that generation, and it's funny to me to think about it, because there's essentially that generation which was kind of raised after the Great Generation, or well, I guess it wasn't, they weren't the that generation before the baby boomers wasn't necessarily the Great Generation, but the one they actually call the greatest generation was, the ones who fought in World War I or World War II. And actually fought in World War II. So they were all born between 1901 and 1927. So that's the baby boomer generation. I'm sorry, that's the greatest generation. I'm all over the place. Let me just start from the beginning. Let me just start from when they started, classifying as generations, and there was this period of time between 1883 and 1900 dubbed the Lost Generation. And it's kind of interesting. It typically, there's somebody who kind of coins the term, but they were the generation that essentially grew up and fought in World War One. Now, the thing about that is, based off of that age range, everyone's pretty much gone. Well, no, everyone is gone. Not pretty much. You're either dead or you're not dead, I guess. But they're all deceased by now, because that the last ones that were born in 1900. That's what's that? 119 years. So that would be a little crazy. Although I think, there were a couple people who might have been around, like in the last 10 years who actually died from that generation. But they're all deceased. And that generation, they went through World War II. No, again, went through World War One, sorry. And as they completed that, there was like the gap between the wars, and they had children, and their children who were all born in 1901 through 1927. Those are the ones that were part of that greatest generation, and that ended up growing up to fight in World War II. Now, kind of to credit like Tom Brokaw, he's the one who actually kind of popularized that term, the Greatest Generation. He wrote a book by that name. Now, it's kind of interesting because there's a generation squeezed in between there called the Silent Generation. The Silent Generation. I think you're supposed to whisper it. It feels like you should. But, they were born between 1925 and 1942. And it includes some people who fought in World War II, but most of them fought in the Korean War and the Vietnam War. Kind of noticing this pattern when they first started kind of putting together these groupings, they're kind of tied to wars in a sense, and it makes a lot of sense, because those were significant events in U.S. history. And also note that, this is the categorization by the Western world, the Americas and Europe. In the Eastern world, as they call it, is, the Asian countries, China, Japan, they kind of have different classifications for their generations. Now, you got to imagine they experience things from a way different perspective, different culture, live through things a lot differently. I mean, Japan obviously, they got the short end of the stick when it came to the war there, but the baby boomers, which were the largest generation, they I think people who are really kind of, coming up with these names, these things came up kind of after the fact. So it's, it's one of those things that, they kind of, baby boomers, that's a good name. We're going to call the other ones, I don't know, Silent Generation. And, hey, those guys in World War II, they were great, and those lost ones, the lost generation, kind of theme seems kind of funny to me. But anyways, so that leads us next to Generation X. Now, Generation X is, another generation that was, they were born following World War II and between 46 to 64. Nope. They were born between the 1960s and the early 1980s because, they couldn't be born during the same time as the baby boomers. That would be weird and unethical. But Generation X, the 60s, they were born in the 60s. They weren't, so, the baby boomers are the ones who went through the 60s, 70s, were like during the rebellious era, during the protests of the Vietnam War. They were having kids, and, these kids, these Generation Xers are between, the 60s and they say the early 80s. This is where it bothers me because I technically fall in that grouping, Generation X, but they also classify millennials as, between the early 1980s and, mid to 90s, early 2000s. And they put that kind of loose grouping on it. So if in some places you look it up, and like I was born in 81, so they'd say between 81 and 2000 is a millennial, or maybe like 2002. Like some places would say that. But then you look and it sees Gen X, which is, 60s to 81. Like I've seen it that way too, like 61 to 81. some people maybe, I guess, want to be a little bit more precise than say this Wikipedia. That's, generalizing the dates a little bit more. But that's the thing. Like in some cases, I fall right there where I'm considered Generation X and technically considered a millennial, and I don't want to identify with the millennials. And this is where I have to inject my opinion because I feel like maybe millennials got a bad rap because they've just been kind of targeted, and I think sometimes of the millennials are the ones who basically they say they just live at home with their parents and they don't have a job. They're in their late 30s, while they're doing this. And, I have a problem being classified as that because, I was working since I was, well, when I was cleaning houses for my grandmother, like, 9, 10 years old, but officially working on the books, as soon as I could get a job, which was 16, I was working and, basically working ever since. And only a few periods in my life where I actually took a break. And so, and then the period of time when I actually, moved out on my own, and I was only 17 years old and I had an apartment and I was supporting myself. And so like I take offense to just the automatic classification that millennials all are kind of fit in that group. And I know it's kind of silly to think that that classification should mean everybody, but when you got somebody like from a political side, who's out there, who's in that generation and causing a stir, and they're like, oh, this is the millennials, this is the new wave of politicians, these millennials, and you get just automatically grouped in because, oh yeah, well I was born in that same range, so I'm a millennial, like by definition. So that makes me crazy, like this crazy politician lady. Like that's just kind of ridiculous to me, because I'd rather say, well, I was from Generation X, even though Generation X was probably not even better, because these classifications all to me seem pretty arbitrary. Doesn't necessarily mean that's who you are, but you're being marketed to as if that is the case. I mean, I was always like being marketed to for like cell phone cases for like the Nokia phones. Like I just remember, and I don't know why that just stands out, but my point is, you were getting bombarded with like the flashy cases, like you needed one for every day of the week or one to match every outfit you had or something like that, as if that was like the millennials, like all of them want it like that, but so the marketers, they try to hit the biggest, broadest, reach, right? So they just kind of group everything in. I didn't have phone case. I had practical phone cases. That was my deal. Like I needed something practical because I wasn't about to spend, whatever, a couple $100. At the time, $200 on a phone was a lot of money. Now it's like, I wish I could pay $200 for my phone. Like I've got a Note 9, and yeah, you left $200 like $1,000 ago. Like when they're $1,200 phones, which is just nuts. Actually, to be fair, I think the $200 sticks in my head because that's all you had to put down to get the new phone, because they were subsidized. But that's another thing, part of that whole generation. Like the millennials really did kind of grow up, during a time of, the ones that were closer to the end of the 90s and the early 2000s, probably more like mid 90s, late 90s. And things were like a lot different, in my opinion. Like I feel like there was a lot more things that were kind of started to become more easily handed out to people, like where you didn't have to work as hard, like for things, in a sense. It was until you hit 2008, like things were pretty good. They were handing out houses to anybody, like everybody could get a freaking house. And that's obviously what caused the big crash, the real estate market crash in 2008. But like that stuff trickles over because now, when people are just expecting handouts, there's a generation of people who just kind of were handed things like easily. And then all of a sudden you're kind of forced to face reality and, oh, wait, what do you mean? Like you kind of told me about this balloon payment, but I really wasn't paying attention because my program was on, my show was on. I needed to watch that while we were signing the paperwork, or I needed to finish this text conversation and you interrupted me. No, like it's craziness. And I told you this episode was going to be bad, but hopefully you're still listening. But my point is I feel like the baby boomers, like, I think they get a great rap because I feel like they kind of were considered a hardworking generation. Like that's a generation of people who kind of were at the booming stages of mature manufacturing. With the between those 60s, and then it kind of fell off. But then they had to kind of deal with that struggle, and obviously, like, they had to deal with the recession. But I think they pulled out of that recession a lot better, because they kind of had a better character. Like they were taught better morals or just better, common sense. Is any of this making sense? It's just frustrating to me because I feel like you kind of get defined by these generations, but then some people are just resigned to just kind of absorb it and be like, yeah, that's what I am. Yeah, you're calling me lazy and say I live with my parents, so what? If you think that's what I'm going to be, that's what I'm going to be, just because you said that's what I'm going to be. And it's just easier for me to be that. So then you got the people who are in their 30s who just smoke weed and live in their parents' basement, and they're okay with it. There's like no ambition behind it. Like I remember, like I used to hustle when I was 10, 9, like however I could get money, go help my grandmother clean the houses, like go sell candy bars around the neighborhood, that you were supposed to be selling for the fundraiser, but you sold them for a little bit more maybe, and you took skimmed off the top. I don't know. Maybe that happened. Maybe that didn't happen. But, you go do the lawns. You go mow the lawns. You shovel the driveways, And no offense to my brothers, but my youngest brothers, who are 6 years younger than me, like, they didn't really do that kind of stuff. They kind of just got stuff. And they got to stay home a lot longer and live home a lot longer. So that, obviously, like, I've got some feelings about that. But I feel like it's a thing of that generation. It felt like they were just kind of lazy. Like they just didn't have they weren't striving for great things. Kind of, like a lot of what I feel like was something that people in at least in the age group that I grew up in. So I was born obviously 81, early 80s, and I grew up with like friends, and I felt like we were all ambitious and we were all motivated to make our own money and not have to depend on our parents, and all wanted to do what we could to move out as soon as possible, and I feel like that was something that was just kind of like how I was born. I mean, I think my father had great work ethic and taught that pretty well. And my grandfather, my dad's dad was like the same way. Like they always kind of said, like, work hard, good things will come, kind of, and you got that sense. My grandmother, like my dad's mom, like same thing, like obviously had us working, and not like slave labor, she's paying us well. And we were out there doing like kind of dirty jobs and earning money, trying to save up, trying to make it. And I kind of feel like some of that work ethic gets lost, and I think now, like, maybe some of the earlier millennials, like maybe, I don't know, or maybe they figured it out later. I don't know. Like you do see, like, and that's the thing, you can't really classify very easily, but there are millennials out there who do work hard and kind of fall in line into that, having good work ethic and finding a way to make it and make a living for themselves and have their own places and have their own things, and that kind of makes me proud, like, to think that at least that's still instilled in some people, because I feel like it gets lost in other people. And I don't want to like cause a rift, and some people won't agree with this, but like I think marijuana is like one of the biggest contributors. People who like just go out and who people who make smoking weed a central point of their life. Like I think it just sucks the motivation out of things. I witnessed it firsthand. Like I lived with a guy, well, a kid. You know, we were teenagers when I first met him. Well, no, I guess it was early 20s, but late teens, early 20s. But I lived with this guy that essentially that was the center of his universe, and like he just had no motivation and no ambition. Like, you know, the ambition always seemed to be somehow related to marijuana, and that always was hard. And like it was hard for me to, you know, kind of sit back and watch it. And you know, there was the times when I had to deal with the nonsense of, you know, the parties when I needed to get up early. I think I've told that story. And you know, and obviously when it became a gateway drug into like cocaine, and this guy started selling it, and then next thing you know, you got bounty hunters after you, kicking doors in, sticking a shotgun in your face, asking where the dude was, and you know, and you're just like, man, I just wanted to go to sleep and get up and go to work and just keep my nose clean, and I gotta deal with this shit. Excuse my language. This stuff. But that was a problem for me. And it was, and I'm obviously going on a rant about pot, like, but like I think it was a major contributor to it. Because again, if everything is done in moderation, like I don't feel like that's one of those things that people can figure out how to moderate. Like unless you were like, for whatever reason, you go to Amsterdam and you go and, you know, smoke some marijuana, one of those marijuana bars or whatever you call it in Amsterdam, and that was just like you did that for like a vacation, you did it one time or whatever, like I don't know, you know, like okay, fine, you know, but I'm talking about the people who that's what they wake up thinking about when they're gonna smoke it, and they go to bed high, you know, and they repeat the next day. And you know, I remember being like furious because I was working in this restaurant. I was a kitchen manager, or I'm sorry, a shift supervisor. I was a shift supervisor. I still worked in the kitchen, but I actually said to my friend, I was like, "You need a job?" I was like, "Hey, come on down. Like, I can help you." And I was taking it all seriously. I was like, you know, I'm dressed up in my business attire, like for the job, and he comes down to interview and he was high. Oh my gosh, did that drive me nuts. It was like, of all the most disrespectful things you could do, like you show up high to an interview. Like I know, like you're thinking, well, it's my friend, I'm a shoo-in. But here's how bad the situation was at that restaurant, because the general manager still ended up hiring him even after I said, you need to send him home and tell him to come back when he's not high, and then maybe give him another chance at an interview. He hired him. And I mean, that was kind of a testament to the kind of general manager he was. I think they smoked weed together. Anyways, that was later on, but that was just I mean, that's the restaurant business for you. You know, it's like shaking my head kind of situation. So, you know, I do think that, you know, to some degree, you got to consider the source of what's causing lack of ambition. And that's kind of my rant about marijuana. So I really ended up doing this episode because I got into a kind of a funny, I guess, conversation / debate / rant about millennials, and how I made some kind of comment at work to a couple coworkers about not liking millennials. And then, you know, one of them, like a friend of mine, basically was like, "But you're a millennial." And I was like, "No, I'm not." And he's like, "Yeah, you are." And like I said, when I was born, he's like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure you're a millennial." And I was a little bit shocked because I always really thought I'm Generation X because of the year I'm born. But, you know, it was kind of a funny conversation, you know, / I was on the fringe of offending somebody because I was kind of talking trash about millennials. and more or less in my defense of my own character and not feeling I belong in the millennial categorization. And so that was really why I kind of went into this rant. But then this friend of mine said you should do an episode about this, because it is about kind of finding your identity. If you think about it, more or less, how do you stand out amongst your peers is a part of finding your identity. Like some people kind of feel like they just kind of blend in. They go with what their peers like. I feel like I have varying things depending on the subject, because, with football, like I kind of lean towards being on the same page as my brothers and my father, because we all like, football, and, me and my brothers like the Patriots, and, of course I'll alienate a bunch more people, alienate the potheads and alienate everybody that's not a Patriots fan, but it is what it is. Don't listen to this episode. So, I tend to kind of lean that way, and I think, that's kind of a testament to that particular subject, because those are the peers in my life that also like it. When it comes to technology, it's like I've got friends, some people that I work with, some friends that we all kind of lean towards Android, and that's kind of what's we're identifying as Android users. And, I think I had gone on a little bit of a rant during that episode I did about, iPhone versus Android. And, mainly because it is a part of your identity. Your phone is such a major part of your identity. You carry it with you everywhere. It's like you always have it within hand reach, if not, you know where it is, and you can go and get it as soon as you need to know something that's on that phone. That phone provides you life, and no, not air, but an access, a portal to your outside world. But that's kind of another example, because that in that subject, there's people I identify with that are also Android users, and that like the whole ecosystem. So I think it depends on the subject. You're gonna have people who lean the same way as you when it comes to politics, and your whatever other kind of beliefs. Like you're gonna find people who kind of share those beliefs, and you're gonna gravitate towards them. And there's some people who are super extreme to the extent where they only associate with people that have the certain similar beliefs or likes when it comes to certain things. But I think to have a well-balanced identity, in a sense, and I can coin that, throw that on a t-shirt, you're looking for a balanced identity, I think you got to kind of gravitate towards the people that it makes sense to gravitate towards when it comes to certain subjects, but it doesn't mean that those are the only people that you're going to associate with, period. So, that's how I ended up on this episode, and that's kind of how I feel like it relates to finding your identity, because you got to kind of examine yourself and your peers and figure out how they fit in your life and how they help you make up your identity. Now, I'm going to kind of end, because I'm, going down this path of millennials, but I'm going to end this last segment is going to be about how marketers kind of, this is actually from inc.com or Inc. magazine, or whatever you want to call it. Inc. short for Incorporated, but it's just INC. They have an article called 27 Expert Tips for Marketing to Millennials. And of all the articles that I kind of came across, this one stood out to me because it's well, you'll see. So the number one thing is make sure your product is Instagram worthy. I mean, what's that kind of say about millennials and the millennial generation? That they just feel like, they're just completely hooked and fixated on Instagram. And if it's not on Instagram, it's not important. I mean, you got an entire new category of, or classification, job classification is the word I'm looking for, because of Instagram influencers. People are getting paid money to just talk about stuff on Instagram, or show pictures, or show support for things on Instagram. And an Instagram influencer, that became the name. That's the actual thing. So that being said, it's kind of like amusing to me but marketers recognize it and they say your product will do well if you can appeal to people who are, you know, on Instagram, who can find your product through Instagram. So it says a lot about millennials. And, you know, hey, you are what you are. I'm going to let you be what you want to be, man. Come on. So the next thing, number 2, is let your audience be your star. So, oh, okay. Interesting. As I'm kind of reading this, it's so funny. You should hear this, but I'm not going to tell you. No, I will tell you. But, essentially that just means let the audience fall in love with the product, and then they'll just kind of help you promote it because they're just going to talk about it. That's essentially how things kind of blow up, socially, virally. Now, again, optimize content for social. It needs to be something that can be short, essentially, for short attention spans. I'm not saying all millennials have short attention spans, but they do. And, you want to focus on word of mouth. So that's kind of this viral concept. You want to actually meet with them in person. Now, it used to be that a lot of advertising and marketing happened through television. That's obviously shifting in a Netflix world with no advertisements. It's a little bit harder to get people's attention. You got to get out in public. You got to you got to go to where you can find millennials. Usually they're clustered under a bridge, So you just kind of find them and you kind of get out there and you market to them that way. And you hope it goes viral. If you got a product that's catchy, that's going to be flashy, or it's going to make them feel like they have to have it, and then they have to have it and then go brag about it to their friends, That's what they look for. So, I think you got to also, like, the next thing in there is, give them an instant response. I think a lot of that is it's like that, the feedback loop. It really needs to be like a short kind of feedback loop kind of thing, where you're going to let them try the product. This is how I'm interpreting this. I didn't actually, do any due diligence here, but I'm interpreting that to be, if your product sucks, you're going to find out really quick because all of a sudden it's not going to sell, or you're going to get the negative response where all the Instagram and social media talk is trash talk. So, you gotta fix it right away. You gotta be on top of it as soon as it's a problem, and then you gotta actually fix it right away. So this episode is a hodgepodge of crap, right? So now I'm talking about, marketing strategies, but hey, whatever. Maybe you'll gain something from it. Again, and it actually says that the next one is, make your campaigns adaptable. Again, you got to be able to pivot. I think that's with anything. And here's the funny thing, because the millennials, this group of people, the younger generation, I want to stop saying millennials because it's starting to bug me, but the younger generation, this group of generation that's, within the last 20, 25, 30 years, so talking strictly people who are in their 20s, maybe early 30s, mostly in that 20s range, they can have a big impact on your business if they don't like something and if they do like something, right? So, if you screw up, it's going to be instantaneously known around the world that you screwed up. So you got to really consider that stuff. These people who are out there trying to get their side hustles, and you're dealing with the shared economy, and those apps have instant feedback ratings. Like, you can easily get, shunned basically from doing whatever you're doing by screwing it up so bad that you get, negative rating, and then people just don't want to have to deal with you, or don't want you to provide them business or whatever. So you got to be careful. There's 27 of these things. I'm not going to read all of them, so I'm skipping. Let's see. You got to seem authentic, and you got to try to build trust, which I think that should be for any generation. Stop leaving out the important generations. Don't just focus on the millennials. Be transparent. Don't sell products. Sell your purpose. That's a generic marketing crap. But, I don't know about that one. I think there's something to be said, you want to sell the purpose of it, but like in essence, then you're selling the product. You're showing this product, and this product does this stuff. So, like you're just kind of splitting hairs, but whatever. I'm just being cranky pants today, aren't I? And let's see, be authentic, make it post worthy. Let's see, find alternatives to traditional ads. So again, here's a little secret. Anybody can buy a Facebook ad or a Google ad or a Reddit ad, So you want to do it well. You don't want to just go out there and, just throw crap at the wall kind of situation. You want to actually, make sure that your marketing dollars are being well spent, So that's where maybe you are paying somebody to promote it through Snapchat or WhatsApp or what's that or this, that, or Insta app or whatever, FaceBat, something like that. But maybe that's what you're doing, right? So if that's the case, then make sure you're tracking it and you're checking that response rate and immediately pull the campaign if it's not doing well. Don't just continuously let it run. Back in the day, like a marketing strategy used to be kind of to keep things fresh, just kind of run old campaigns. And actually, I was just watching. What was it? Well, I think it was I think it was one of the Sunday night football game, or maybe it was one of the middle of the day games, but I forget what time frame this was on. But whatever I was watching, it. Oh, actually, no, it was like Freeform, and it was like a one of those Halloween movies. Anyways, they had a Tootsie Pop commercial, which is like this throwback. It's like, I remember this Tootsie Pop commercial, with the owl and the little boy, and he's like, how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll Pop? And the owl is like, let's see. And he goes, 1, 2, 3, bites it. And he goes, 3, and hands a stick back to the kid. Classic freaking commercial. Like, and just so well made. And they're still airing it. And that just blew my mind. I was just like, wow. They didn't even like refresh it. They still show the M&M commercial with the Santa and M&M's meeting, and and them both like saying, "Hey, you do exist. He does exist," and they pass out. Well, the red and the Santa, but yellow is just like, Santa, what's going on? But anyways, I digress, and I get sidetracked easily. That's probably a millennial quality. Sigh. So let's see what else. Oh, this is an interesting one. So appeal to FOMO and frugality. Well, the FOMO, more importantly, fear of missing out for all you baby boomers. FOMO. So that was an interesting thing, because that one is really like, and I think part of the strategy has existed for a long time, but it's just kind of taken on a new name. But it's really just controlling the supply chain and creating demand by not providing enough of the product. The Nintendo Switch did this when it first came out, where they just didn't. Nintendo's notorious for doing this. We're only putting out a certain amount and then creating this demand because there's just no more units, but they purposely didn't manufacture enough, and that was part of their whole strategy. They cover that in a great book called Console Wars. But that's a great strategy, but that should be a great strategy for any generation, not just the millennials. They don't own FOMO. Maybe one of them marketed or coined it. Let's see. Focus on reviews. That's a key thing. Establish sincere relationships with influencers. I don't like that one. Let's see. Listen to them. Utilize influence. Oh, come on. They're just repeating stuff. Man, this article must have been written by a millennial. Oh, why am I hating on millennials? Because I am one, I guess, according to math or English or whatever, classifications in marketing. That's enough. That's enough. Let's cut this stuff out now. Stop talking trash talking. So, the moral of the story is, don't be that guy or girl. Be what you want to be. You don't have to fit into a generational category. That's just not what you need to do in order to find your identity. It's good to know. I think it's fascinating if you study marketing or took marketing classes, how you're marketed to, and then you still think, well, now I know, so it won't happen again. But it still happens. You still get targeted. And, it just so happens that it's just one of those things that they're good. Marketers are good at their job, and there's, somewhat proven methods and science behind it. So, moral of the story is don't fall victim. Don't be victimized by marketers. Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Now, buyer beware and blah, blah, blah. And, I hope you hated this episode as much as I did. But I think the next episode will be better. So, come back if you want, whatever. I gave the non-listeners some time away. I gave them all passes to go visit their families. I'm being nice. They're supposed to be back by now. None of them will come back, but I know where they live and they'll be tracked down. So, yeah, I'm not high. I just want to get that out there. I'm not high. I don't do drugs. So, if you thought I might be high for this episode, I just told you why you shouldn't smoke pot. So, believe me when I say I'm not high. And until next time, this is Finding Your Identity, and I hope you did that. I know this was a fun episode for me to make, and I hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, this is Finding Your Identity. Goodbye. Oh, actually, no, one more thing. I'm just going to throw this in here. I worked on that farm I mentioned, and there was, I worked for my cousin, and his father worked there. And, I remember after our shifts, I guess this is my story for today. I'm throwing it right in after I said goodbye, but I didn't say goodbye yet. So, it's not officially over, but you'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. But he was kind of a zany character. He kind of a little bit grumpy, like a little bit mad at the world, but sometimes funny. It was always my goal to try to make the dude laugh. Like I always wanted to make him laugh because it felt like he'd be cracking a statue, but he did occasionally. But so towards the end of the summer, there'd be days where we'd pretty much be wrapping up. I started 5:30 in the morning, so we'd be finishing up around 2:30 or something like that, 2:30, 3 o'clock sometimes, unless we were out baling hay, and then we didn't finish until we got all the hay in the barn. Otherwise, you just can't go, even if that's 9 o'clock at night and you're using truck headlights to stuff the barn. But we'd be standing around in our shop, and we'd kind of just be like, killing a little bit of time, maybe like be hanging out for like 20 minutes, half an hour. And it was really like everyone was kind of waiting to see who would like leave first, I guess, because I always kind of waited for my cousin to basically say we could go. But it was always my cousin's father who would say, well, I suppose. And he'd walk away, and he'd get in his car or his truck, and he'd just drive away. And I always look at that, and it always cracked me up because I'm just like, he didn't say goodbye. He didn't say I'm going to go now. He just said, well, I suppose. And that was basically his goodbye and saying it's time to go. And sometimes I'd actually end up having to stay and finish doing some other work, because he'd sometimes just do that, like 12 o'clock or right after lunch, and decide he supposed that it was time to go. But it was just a funny saying. So I shared that in this extra minute here. So on that note, thank you for listening to Finding Your Identity, as I'm saying it again. And, well, I suppose